Greetings, this is Betsy, and today we are bringing you an online workshop called Accessibility Online, and we will be focused on how to make your online events and meetings accessible to people who are deaf and hard of hearing. Right now you're seeing everybody. This is your team of presenters. I'm going to introduce everybody in a few moments, but we wanted to see who your speakers were today, but now we'll get started. So our topic is accessibility online. We have a lot of terrific content, and I will tell you this is going to be posted, so you will have a chance to get the information and the links and the resources, and there is a lot of great information, but this will stay available to you. Slide. Today, we're going to cover the importance of this, why we do this work. We're going to talk a lot about the planning and how to prepare for your events and get the information you need. We're going to cover captioning and give you a how-to for captioning videos and events. We're thrilled to have Relay North Carolina with us, which is a service that provides captioning for meetings and events, and you will learn how to access that. We'll cover transcripts, and we'll also cover how to get an interpreter online. And then we'll talk about marketing and outreach. This is going to be recorded, so we won't have live questions, but we'll give you our contact information to reach out to us afterwards. As you can see, we are using an interpreter at this event, and we'll cover how we're doing that. Slide. Let me tell you a little bit about who's bringing you this webinar today, webinar workshop. We are Arts Access. We have been around since 1984, and our mission is to work to make the arts accessible to people with disabilities. All art forms, all cultural organizations, museums, galleries, theaters, arts education, school-age programs, wherever art is being taught or provided, that is our arena for working to provide accessibility. And we work with all ages, and we work with all disabilities. Our main services are training and consultation, like what we're doing today. We also work with organizations and individuals individually if you have a need. We provide audio description, which is another accommodation for people that are blind or low vision, where we provide a description of what is happening on a stage or a film or an event. Stay tuned. We're going to be providing another workshop down the road on how you can do that online. We have an active website, and we do a newsletter every 2 weeks full of resources and information. We also can share events you are doing that you want to promote to the disability community. So let me tell you who we are. I am Betsy Ludwig. I'm the executive director. I celebrated 10 years with Arts Access in August, and so I've been providing consultation and disability services for a long time, and I'm really love doing it with Arts Access. The other person on the webinar today is Megan Bostic. She is our programs manager. She oversees the Wake Arts inclusion and many of our efforts, and is sort of our tech guru. So she'll be helping administer the webinar today. Our newest employee is Tamar. She is on the webinar. She is our programs coordinator. She supports all our programs in lots of ways. So that's the three of us. You see our emails, but wanted to make that connection and know that we are here. Slide, Megan. Our two other presenters today that you're going to hear from are Philip Woodward. He is the Systems Change Manager at the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, and he's also connected and does work with the North Carolina ADA Network. That's Americans with Disabilities Network, which provides supports and services on implementing the law. Also with us today is Bola Desalu. She is the Customs Relation Manager at Relay North Carolina, and she's going to be explaining that service. Both Philip and Bola live with hearing loss. Philip is going to be using his voice today. Bola will be speaking through sign, and the interpreter will be voicing for her. We think it's really important whenever you talk about disability, you involve people with lived experience. And we are really grateful for Philip and Bola's expertise on the subject matter, but also the fact they're bringing the perspective of users and lived experience of deafness and hard of hearing. Slide. And lastly, a huge thank you to the funders. We did not charge for this webinar or need to hand off the cost to users of people getting this webinar, because we had a nice project grant from the NCADA network. And a thank you to Karen Hamilton, the network project coordinator, for working with this and helping us secure the funding. So this is provided at no cost to folks that are getting the webinar. Thank you. Slide. So we're going to launch into the content matter. We always like to talk about the importance and help people understand the why behind the how. Many people already invested in this and get it. Sometimes people are new to this topic, and sometimes you have to go back to your organization and help people understand why this is so important. So we're going to cover a few aspects of that. First of all, there's a lot of people who are deaf and with hearing loss. You can see the statistics here on the screen. 1,242,700 people have hearing loss or are deaf in North Carolina. Then 20% of people report some degree of hearing loss in the US. And if you think about it, as we age, losing your hearing is one of the most common side effects or life occurrences as you age. So there's a lot of people that are not able to use online content without some kind of accommodation. And we're going to get into that. But it's a lot of people. If you aren't thinking about this, you're missing a market share and you're not being fully inclusive to the community. Slide. The law. There are laws about this. On this slide is a picture of Justin Dart and George Bush signing the ADA. We're not going to go deep in the law because that is a lot of content and that is a different workshop, which we do offer, and some other of our partners on this webinar can tell you a lot more. But please know that the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, passed in 1990, does cover online communications. When the law was written, the internet was not what it was, so there wasn't as much in the specific law. But in the Amendments Act of 2008, did address changing technologies and effective communication. So this is covered by the law. Slide. It's under the section about effective communication. There's 3 parts of it: auxiliary aids and services. Services would include things like captioning and sign language. Modifying your policies, practices, or procedures. If you are not currently doing this and say we don't do it, you could be challenged of, well, you need to modify that. You need to modify that policy. And then your staff and your organization needs to understand this. So this is covered by the law. There's a wonderful resource at the bottom of this slide with the Southeast ADA Center with a phone number and a web address. If you have questions about what your organization should be doing, you can call them and get your answers and get a ton of more resources on their website. On this slide is also a little celebrate the ADA. The law was passed 30 years ago, and this July will be the anniversary. And plug, Arts Access is holding an event and celebration, so stay tuned. Slide. Another law that impacts this, if you get federal funding, Section 508 of the Rehab Act, and then WCAG, that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and you can learn a lot more. We strongly suggest that if you are the ADA coordinator for your organization, or you are the website or marketing person, that you have some understanding how the law applies to you. Slide. So there's the marketing aspect, there's the law, and then there's also changing models of disability. How we think and talk about disability has evolved and changed. Some of the older models and antiquated and outdated way of thinking include the three models on the screen. There's the moral model, and there's an image of a scary painting with a religious figure looking like they're standing over somebody stricken with a disability. I use that word stricken intentionally because that is a language you often hear, but it was the idea that a higher power gave you the disability, that people with disabilities are bad or it has something to do with evil. There's a lot of imaging and messaging around this. People with disabilities were shut away and isolated and segregated um, because you didn't want to catch it or you didn't want to be associated with them. That is a very negative way of looking at disability, and one we encourage you not to use word or attitudinal things like that. Another way of thinking about disability is the charity model. In the middle of the screen is a picture of Jerry Lewis. He used to hold a telethon, and it was a lot of messaging about poor, pitiful people with disabilities. We need to take care of them. We need to rescue them. We need to do for them. Now, raising money and supporting research and supports for people with disabilities is an awesome thing. But the idea that you do it because they can't do it for themselves, or you are better than, or you're paternalistic or maternalistic, that is a very old way of thinking. Lastly, on the screen is an image of the medical model. This young girl is throwing away her crutches and looks like she's been cured. She's been fixed. Um, the medical model, the bad thing about that is the messaging that until you're like me, until you're typical, until you're normal, I am making quote marks, you're not okay. And if we can just fix you, that's the goal. Now, once again, there's nothing wrong with research and medicine and therapies that help your functioning and improve your life. But the idea that until you're cured, you're not okay. A lot of people with disabilities will say, this is me. I'm not going to stop being deaf. I'm not going to stop having autism. So I need the world to adjust to me, not try and fix me. So those are older models that are still very prevalent in our culture, but we are encouraging you to think about a more progressive model that the disability advocacy work has encouraged, and we're making strides in that. This is the social rights model, and this is the idea that the impact of disability really has to do with the environment, with the interaction between people with disabilities and what they encounter. Mostly the barriers, the physical barriers, steps, stairs, elevators for somebody that uses a wheelchair, non-captioned or non-useful online content that people can't see or hear if they live with a disability. Attitudinal, people not valuing this, people encountering attitude barriers, etc. So what needs to happen is the modifications come in the environment. We make the adjustments, we provide the accommodations, we change our thinking. When we do that, we provide equitable access and opportunity. There is a lot of talk now of diversity, inclusion, and equity. We believe disability is right in the heart of that work. If you're going to make it equal for people, equal access, you are following the social and rights model. Two photographs in this slide. These are our friends at the North Carolina Art Museum who have been doing a lot of great work around accessibility. But the top photo is a young girl participating in a hands-on art day. And this was a day designed to be inclusive and welcoming. And we were reaching kids and families with them. And then on the bottom is a picture of two people giving an audio described tour of the art to a gentleman who is blind. And so he is hearing the art, and you don't see this in the photo, but that day we actually did tactile experiences so they could experience the art with reduced barriers. These are two examples of a cultural organization practicing the social and rights model. Slide. So some of the words, ableism, that is when you are looking at things as an able-bodied person, um, versus the social model. So some things that you want not to do, it's not allowing people to make their own choices. You want the individual to change to fit you. You focus on the deficit or what they can't do versus on what they can do. And that you're the boss. The staff member, the professional, the doctor is in charge. That is an old way of thinking. So we encourage you to think about it's us that needs to accommodate the person. The individual has the right to participate and make decisions. That goes back to if you're going to work with disability, involve the people you're seeking to include. Have them be on your board, have them be in the planning, have them lead the activity. So involve people. And recognize the individual as an expert or they're in charge. Ask them what they need or want. Don't make assumptions. So the models all drill down to, for this webinar, if you are offering an online event or service, as the provider, it's your job to think about the access. Don't put the burden on the user. So are you marketing this? Are you explaining how they can get it? Are you just providing it? So it puts the responsibility on the provider, not the user. Slide. So that's the why behind the how. Now we're going to lead into Philip Woodward, and he's going to share some of his perspectives on both the content and some lived experience. Philip?
Interpreter switch.
Woodward. Thank you very much, Betsy, for that excellent overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act and disability models. Hi, my name is Philip Woodward, and I identify as hard of hearing, but I also know American Sign Language, or ASL. I was diagnosed with a severe to profound bilateral hearing loss at age 4.5, and I grew up wearing 2 hearing aids and reading lips. I was mainstreamed all through school and did not start learning sign language until I took an evening class in 10th grade. Today I use ASL interpreters for meetings and attending conferences, and I use relay conference captioning for all of my work conference calls, meetings, and webinars. Accessibility is very important to deaf and hard of hearing people, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, where we are all physical distancing at home. People with disabilities do not want to feel isolated or left out. That means deaf and hard of hearing people will need accommodations or technology to participate in telework meetings and webinars, and to view videos that people share on social media. I can remember after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, my parents purchased a closed captioning decoder for one of our TVs back around 1991 to 1992 while I was in 7th grade, and it changed my world. I finally realized how much I was missing out on when I watched TV. Now, if you come into my house, you will find the caption turned on in every single TV. Statistics show that approximately 10 to 20% of the population has a hearing loss of some type, as Betsy pointed out earlier. And this number is growing as our population ages. Captioning can benefit such a wide range of people besides deaf and hard of hearing people. Children and foreign language speakers can increase their English language reading skills. People can understand dialogue better whenever there is background noise. And by background noise, I mean background noise wherever you are, such as a lawnmower outside of your house, or a lawnmower that's in the video causing background noise. Also, I saw a study posted on Twitter about how many people watch videos on their smartphone with the volume turned off in the subway, in the airport, or even in the office because they don't want their coworkers hearing them watching videos all the time. Also, another example of the benefit from captioning, my family and I love Star Wars, and we enjoyed celebrating May the 4th earlier this month. But whenever we go to the movies in the movie theater, I borrow caption glasses that caption all of the movies on the lens of the glasses. When we saw The Last Jedi in December 2017, my beautiful wife Lila, who is hearing, said that she had trouble understanding Yoda. But I could understand him just fine with my captioning glasses. So that is one benefit that I got from the captions that other Star Wars fans in the movie theater might have missed out on. While captioning benefits me and many, many other people, for people who are born deaf, whose native language is ASL, they might benefit more from an ASL interpreter than from the captions. That's because ASL is a unique language with its own grammar and syntax that includes many non-manual markers, like facial expressions. And by the way, last week was National ASL Interpreter Appreciation Day, last Wednesday. So I want to give a shout out and a thanks to the interpreters on this webinar and all of the ASL interpreters all over the country and our world. I want to point out that respectful language to use when describing people with hearing loss is, quote, deaf and hard of hearing is the preferred term to use, instead of hearing impaired or older language like deaf and dumb. I look forward to sharing more about my experiences later on throughout this presentation. Thank you.
This is Megan. For this portion, we want to cover some scenarios that you might find yourselves in. Remember, we're an organization that works mostly with other arts organizations and making their offerings more accessible. So we thought of these scenarios with those organizations in mind, but you should be able to find practical applications regardless. Remember, accessibility is a learning process, especially during this time with so many new platforms and technologies being developed. Another thing to think about, practice makes progress. The more you use ASL interpreters or agencies, the more you caption your videos, the better you'll get at it. If you're someone who hasn't used Captions or ASL or transcripts in the past, you might even start to notice when they're not provided and when things aren't accessible. And always make sure to include people with disabilities in your event planning. Some questions to consider when you're planning your event, and we'll talk about these more in depth in the next slides. Is the event open to the public? Do attendees have to RSVP? Is it pre-recorded without an audience and then posted online, like a tutorial from a teaching artist? Is it a live event with an audience that's going to be posted online after it streams? Is it a live event that won't be recorded, just a one-time thing? And what platform are you using? Each platform has its quirks and tricks. So for events that require participant registration, always give a way for folks to request accommodations. That could be with a checkbox system, like the top screenshot, which asks participants to check all accommodations that apply and lists the following options: sign language, CART or real-time captioning services, assistive listening systems, alternate formats for event information, like a digital copy or large print, and then wheelchair accessibility. You also want to give a deadline for those accommodation requests, which is demonstrated in the bottom screenshot, where the purple pop-up box has an open text field for accommodations, but asks participants to make requests with 9 days in advance. For pre-recorded events that aren't live streamed, like the screenshot on the right, which is an adaptive dance lesson, for this type of event, you want to add captions in post-production and provide a transcript. To facilitate this process, you want to make sure your audio is really good quality when you're recording, and that you avoid putting important visual elements in the bottom third of the screen. This way you leave plenty of room for your captions. If your event is open to the general public, you should plan that people who are deaf or hard of hearing will be in your audience. You want to provide ASL or live captioning. The screenshot on the right is a YouTube video of a singer-songwriter performing on the right-hand side with the ASL interpreter on the left. And that was published on YouTube after it streamed on Facebook Live. And you always want to include accessibility contact information in your marketing materials. Let people know who to reach out to if they have a question about access. If your event is live streamed for an audience or participants and it's going to be archived and put online, consider the platform it's being viewed or streamed on. So what are your options for screen recording, where your recording is going to be stored before you access and edit it, what your options are for saving transcripts and captions, what's built into the platforms that you're using. And you also want to provide ASL and or live captions for these events. You want a way for participants to be receiving the information at the same time. We're going to move on to captioning next. And to start, we're going to watch a quick video. Rooted in Rights produces quick, accessible videos about how to make your online offerings more accessible. And then we'll have Philip discuss more about captioning basics.
Captions in a couple minutes. Captions provide a real-time, on-screen text version of everything spoken within a video, as well as any relevant sounds, music, or intonation. They help all sorts of viewers understand video content, whether you're deaf, hard of hearing, forgot your headphones, or just like to read along. To create captions for YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter videos, first upload your video to YouTube. Using the classic version of Creator Studio, locate the video you want to caption within the dashboard. Click the drop-down next to the video's Edit button and select Subtitles CC. While you can create your captions from scratch by clicking on the Add New Subtitles button, YouTube will usually publish a draft of your captions for you a short time after your video is uploaded. You can also get captions from a third party uploaded directly to your account for as little as $1 a minute. But while both options can be a great start, they usually need to be edited for accuracy. To make sure your captions are just right, click on a published version to pull up YouTube's caption editor. Click the Edit button in the top right of the page and use the caption blocks on the left to edit text and to add or remove captions. To change timing, drag the captions' start and end points on the timeline. Remember, in addition to what is spoken, captions need to include important sounds, inflections, and music. Also, it's best that captions are formatted correctly in order to easily distinguish sounds from speakers and speakers from one another. For an amazing guide on how to format your captions correctly, visit captioningkey.org. Once you've finished editing your YouTube captions, save changes. You can use your captions on Facebook and Twitter by simply downloading them as an SRT file in the Actions drop-down menu. You can upload that SRT file to your video in either platform. Accessibility is cool.
Hi, this is Philip Woodward here. Captioning, as you saw in the video, benefits many users, and these can include people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who use English as a second language, people who have intellectual disabilities or processing disorders, people who enjoy watching videos, because approximately 85% of Facebook videos are viewed with the sound off. And the video we just saw also pointed out people who like to just read or who forget their headphones, for example. Next slide. There is a difference between subtitles and captions. Subtitles typically only reflect the dialogue of what is spoken on the screen, and subtitles can be in a variety of languages. So if you watch films that have foreign languages in, the foreign language might appear on the bottom of the screen in subtitles. Whereas captions not only reflect the subtitles, but also reflect non-spoken information such as environmental sounds, like door creaking, music, or silence. Next slide. Now there's a difference between, or three different types of captioning. There's open, closed, and live captions. Open captions are always visible on the video content. You cannot turn them off because they are burned onto the video. An example of open captions would be like the subtitles that always play when foreign language is spoken during a movie. On the other hand, closed captions can be turned on and off by the viewer. And if you have a TV at home, then the CC button on the remote control will let you control whether or not you want the captions on or off. And they are both used for pre-recorded video content. But there's also another type called live captions, which are real-time captions that can be created by a stenographer or a court reporter, and this type of captioning is known as CART, C-A-R-T, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Transcription. Live captions can also be automatically generated by speech recognition software, but sometimes there will be bloopers or captioning errors because there's not an actual human there to correct it. Thank you.
And this is Megan. There are some ground rules for adding captions to your videos in post-production. Their appearance, what they should include, and how to include those things. I'm going to go over some highlights briefly and then talk about where you can find online guides for all of your captioning questions. Captions should appear at the same time as the sound or speech they're captioning. They should capture important audio information like sound effects and expressions like laughing or crying. The screenshots on the right are when captioning has gone a little bit wrong, as Philip mentioned, can sometimes happen. The top screenshot is describing the crying as sobbing mathematically, and the bottom screenshot is describing music playing off screen as sadly go-karts, and neither of those seem quite accurate. If there are multiple speakers, captions should indicate that, and captions should be on the screen long enough to actually be able to read them. Post-production captions should also be created with enough contrast between the text and the background. We suggest white text with a black outline, and the image on the right demonstrates the readability of white text with a black outline across a spectrum of colors in the background. There are guidelines to indicate when the caption indicates speech or other sounds. Those guidelines include the use of brackets, parentheses, and italics. Ideally, your caption should be available in multiple languages, depending on your audience. They should use a sans serif font and should only have 1 to 3 lines of text per frame. The source linked on the left side of this slide is the Rooted in Rights Access Guide, which they're updating regularly and is a great resource that we'll have linked in the notes of the YouTube video. And the source at the bottom, Captioning Key, goes into really exact and thorough detail about captioning guidelines. So, should you do your captions yourself or should you outsource them? It really depends on the amount of time you have, your experience, capacity, and resources. There are pretty good resources for DIYing post-production captions. YouTube is our go-to. YouTube auto captions your videos with some accuracy, but the accuracy really depends on the audio quality and what's being recorded. YouTube does provide a way to edit your captions, and we'll give you the resource of a one-page guide and a video guide for doing so. Amara and Subtitle Horse are free resources. VLC Media Player allows you to upload a text file if you've typed up your captions. And there's always Final Cut or Adobe Premiere for creating your own captions. There's also apps to consider for your social media video content. Cliptomatic and Caption This are two we know about that support live real-time captioning. And for closed captions on your social media videos, Caption This and Capwing are two we'd recommend. If you're interested in paying for captions, there are an ever-growing number of resources and businesses available. This is not an extensive list, and Arts Access does not necessarily endorse these companies. We just want to share what we've learned and what other people in our world are using. Caption Access, Automatic Sync, and 3Play Media provide live captions, and most of those also provide closed captioning. Our best estimate is that you need to budget $85 an hour. That's not a hard and fast rule. There are discounts for nonprofits. There's add-ons for live streaming. It all depends on what platform you're using, whether or not the service can be used. For closed captioning, after your videos have been recorded, our best estimate is that you budget $1.25 a minute. In some places to start would be alternative communication services, ASL Captions, Rev, or .sub. The last thing we want to talk about with captions is for live meetings. Google Meets captions automatically with a speech recognition software and is incredibly accurate. The big downside here is that it does not auto-save those automatic captions in the recording, but you could use a screen recording software as a workaround for that. For Zoom, enabling captions requires a third-party captioning service or for you to assign someone the role of captioner. Zoom does enable you to download the transcript easily, though. And for WebEx, it's essentially the same. Philip's going to talk a little bit more about his experience with WebEx.
I use WebEx for my North Carolina Council on Developmental Disability staff meetings we are hosting daily while we are teleworking from home. And we also have some events. For example, the council started having conversations with the council events back at the end of April and this month, where we can actually display the captions on the screen for any participant in the event. So that's one of the pros of WebEx that I like. And that's worked very well. Sometimes there can be technical difficulties, but it's very important for the meeting host and for all the participants to, be patient, and also to have a backup plan or multiple backup plans in case there are technical difficulties that don't work. For example, we were using Microsoft Teams before we started using WebEx, and there were problems with getting the captioning or getting the captioner to access Microsoft Teams, so I would have to use my smartphone's live transcribe captioning app and set it by the speaker on my computer to use that to caption until the captioner could connect. So there are many different platforms that you can use, and it's important to bear with the technology and be patient and have backup plans ready to go. Thank you.
And this is Megan again. Thank you for sharing your experience with WebEx, Philip. There's also some captioning resources listed here that will be in the notes for the video. Next, we're going to have Bola, who's going to speak about using a fantastic service available if you live or work in North Carolina.
Hello, my name is Bola Desalu. I would like to speak about a service in North Carolina talking about Relay North Carolina captioning. We call it RCC, Relay Conference Captioning. Next slide. So some of you may be wondering, what is RCC? Relay Conference Captioning allows people who are deaf or hard of hearing to participate in multi-party conference calls or webinars through an internet-connected computer, laptop, or mobile device by reading real-time captioning online. It is free of service for individuals who live in the state of North Carolina or who works in the state of North Carolina. Next slide. Now I would like to show you a video giving you a better understanding of what RCC looks like. If we can play the slide, please.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to start the conference call now so everyone is on the call. Ava told me she's setting up in a coffee shop and James is in his office. As a reminder, please announce your name as you start speaking to support our captioning service.
Relay Conference Captioning, or RCC, is a free service for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to participate fully in meetings, conference calls, webinars, and video conferences. Participants have access to spoken dialogues by reading live streaming captions through the internet using a computer, laptop, tablet, or mobile device. This service is provided through Relay North Carolina. RCC uses the same high-quality captioners that produce closed captioning for live television, news, sports, and weather to deliver real-time captions streamed to an internet-connected computer, laptop, mobile device, or tablet anywhere in the world. As the conference call continues, each participant's words appear on their screen.
So now that Val has explained the process, does anyone have any questions?
RCC users have the option to respond using their own voices or typed responses into a text entry window, which is spoken into the call by the captioner. There are other options to increase accessibility. Another benefit of RCC is that users may print or save a copy of the transcript. RCC users can book RCC service in advance to reserve a captioner.
We can kick this off in January. I'm confident that together we can make this happen.
Relay Conference Captioning is available free of charge to individuals living or working in North Carolina, made possible through Relay North Carolina. For more information on how to use RCC, go to ncrelaycc.com.
Now, RCC website, you have to go to our website. It is www.relaynorthcarolina.com/RCC. You can use any internet browser. Once it pulls up, you will see a blue icon on the right, and it states to book an event. You click that. Next slide. This other window will populate, and it's a form that we have online. It's really self-explanatory. You'll put your first and your last name and your email address. Next. Can you go back one, Megan? Now on the very bottom, you see there's two statements. The first statement says, I understand that relay conference captioning is intended for participating in conference calls, webinars, or multi-party calls. And then the second statement at the bottom says, I certify I'm requesting RCC for myself or participants who are deaf or hard of hearing to participate on a conference call, webinar, or multi-party call. You have to check both boxes. You have to put your phone number and an alternative contact person. Now, it could be either their email or phone number. Next slide. On this next window, you will indicate the telephone conference bridge number and the code. If it's a webinar, then you put the URL there. You put the name of the meeting, event notes, any information that you want to share for that captioner. And then you put down the date, the event, the date of the event, the time, the beginning and the end time, and the time zone. By default, will go to Eastern Standard Time. Next. Now you have two options here for the transcript. The vendor can save a copy on their server, or you can have the transcript destroyed once the meeting is over. If you pick the first one, it's good. You can retain that copy of the transcript on the server, because a month later down the road, you may be looking for that transcript and you can't find it and you feel like you've lost it. You can make contact to the vendor to receive that copy. A lot of government sensitive information or confidential information that is shared in the meeting is usually destroyed after that meeting to protect the confidentiality. The next one down here, you have three options, the participant options. It says to allow participants to view the transcript. The second option is to allow participants to view and save the transcript after the meeting is over. Now that's really kind of nice because you can use it as your meeting notes. And then the third option, once the meeting has concluded, that means the participant cannot view it or save the transcript when the call has ended. Now, the standard use I've noticed, which is more commonly used, is the second one, allow participants to view and save transcript. And then you click submit. Once you submit it, you will receive a confirmation email that states very important information. It says, supposedly you have your meeting next week at 2:00 on a Wednesday. You will go, you will access your email. You hit that confirmation email. It will have a link there inside of that particular email confirming everything. Click that link. It will populate immediately for you to watch the RCC. Next slide. Now, I would like to show you a demo. It is from our www.relaynorthcarolina.com/view-demo. I would like to show you some of the options, the modifications that you can make, modifications in the style, the font size, the color, the background color, and a few other things that will be inclusive in this particular demo. I would like to share my screen, so if you can hold 1 second. Now, I'm sharing my screen. Once you enter, you put your name. It says the username. And so I have Bola here. And then I'll click continue. So this is a demo. Once you click continue, the first thing you see is a green box that says, it tends to show maybe 10 minutes before the actual meeting begins. You notice the lines here? That means that each person that speaks, it breaks it up with the lines. If a person is really speaking for a long period of time, they will put some lines to make some break in between what is being said. If you want to change the style, size of the font, then you go to your right side that says settings. And it's the right side of the screen. And you see your font styles. see Arial, you see Georgia, Helvetica, you see, Times New Roman and so forth. I'm just going to pick here Arial. There's different sizes of the font that you can pick, 8 all the way down to 72. That's very good options for individuals who may be low vision or deaf-blind or blind. And that helps them be able to read the material better if they have any residual vision. So I'm going to pick 48. Now, by default, the color of the font will be white with a black background. But you do have options that you can change it to any color that fits your needs. You have black, you have white, red, blue, green, yellow, gray, silver, brown. Well, I'm just going to pick yellow because I'm wearing yellow today. And then the background color. You have the same options here. Black, white, red, gray, green, yellow. I'm just going to do green. And that's the sample. That's what it would look like. It's a little too bright. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put the default colors, which is white for the color of the font and black for the background color. Now you notice that the video is explaining to the deaf and hard of hearing. They have options as well. For deaf individuals who do not use their voice can type in their response for the person that is speaking on their behalf. And that will be at the bottom right here. You see it says message to captioner. So I'm going to type, hi, this is, she backed it up. Hi, this is Bola, period. I have a question, period. Then I click the little arrow beside it as an enter. And then at the bottom, it says the message is sent. Once the captioner has received your information, they will interrupt and speak on your behalf. And that's how it typically works. Now, if you're hard of hearing or a deaf person that uses their voice, then you can speak for yourself and see what is being typed as you're speaking. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this moment. And I'm going to let Megan do the next slide, but let me stop sharing for a second. Give me 1 minute. All right.
Interpreter switch.
Not yet, Sarah. I'm going to keep going to finish out Bola. You do have options. Before I speak about the embedded RCC, you do have options. If you're watching the webinar, you can have 2 screens up at the same time, split screen. One part is the webinar and the other part is the RCC. Or you can actually use your laptop to watch the webinar and maybe have a different device to read the RCC information. So again, I can use my cell phone to do the webinar. I mean, the webinar, yes. And then the cell phone for the actual RCC. And I just gave you the sample of what that looks like. Next slide, please, Megan. We do offer embedded RCC. And that just means that you see the information embedded on the platform. So it provides live streaming captions for spoken dialect dialogue for web conferencing or webinars by using 3 popular webinar platforms: WebEx, Adobe Connect. Now, WebEx webinar. Now, I want to make sure that people get those two things confused. And then you have YouTube Live. You have WebEx webinar. You have an example there. And it shows you the difference on the PowerPoint. If the next slide can be shown, please. Now, I would like to show you the video that displays the webinar with the RCC being embedded. If we can go ahead and play the video.
Relay Conference Captioning, or RCC, is a free service for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to participate fully in meetings through webinars. Participants have access to spoken dialogues by reading live streaming captions through the internet using a computer, laptop, tablet, or mobile device. This web conferencing service is provided through Relay North Carolina. RCC uses the same high-quality captioners that produce closed captioning for live television, news, sports, and weather to deliver real-time captions embedded or inserted into your webinar screen. A webinar is a live meeting that takes place over the internet. The meeting may consist of a presentation, lecture, workshop, or seminar. Currently, Embedded RCC is compatible with web conferencing platforms such as WebEx, Adobe Connect, Microsoft Live Meeting, and YouTube Live.
Critical to the success of the organization, and it will take time for everyone to understand and be full.
As the webinar leader is speaking, the leader's words appear in the RCC section of the screen in real-time streaming captions.
But I'm confident that we can make it happen. Now,
Relay Conference Captioning is available free of charge to individuals living or working in North Carolina, made possible through Relay North Carolina. For more information on how to use RCC through webinars, go to ncrelaycc.com.
Next slide. So now again, the embedded captioning are available in 3 webinars: Adobe Connect, YouTube Live, and WebEx webinar. If you use any other platform like Zoom, GoToMeetings, you can use 2 separate windows, horizontally or vertically on your computer, or 2 separate devices. Laptop and your cell phone, for example, or your computer, your desktop, and iPad, however you like to do, whatever fits your needs. Now, the benefits of using the RCC, it does increase understanding of conference call meetings or webinars. The delivery of live captioning, you don't have to wait an hour later. You can use real-time captioning right there while the meeting is happening. Available anywhere there is internet access. So what that means is if you're flying to New York for a meeting and you know that there's a staff meeting in North Carolina, you can access it and watch the meeting while it's running, even though you're in another state, but it's happening in North Carolina. So you have options of saving the transcript. When you hit transcript at the very top right-hand corner, at the very bottom, you'll see 3 different ways of saving the transcript. One, you can have an email, print it, and make a copy on your computer. It's really nice to have that as a meeting notes, because for deaf individuals, they can't read and retain the information and write and all that good stuff. So you don't need to purchase any kind of software or any app. It automatically happens. It's easy and it works. Next slide. Now, keep in mind, as you're booking for the RCC, book it in advance, at least 48 hours. That's 2 days in advance. Currently, it's available from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Again, Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. and 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays. They also offer a monthly RCC webinar on the second Wednesday of each month. You have to register at relaynorthcarolina.webx.com. And once you go up there, it will explain more about the RCC services. Thank you very much for listening, and we can go to the next slide and for the next presenter.
Interpreter switch.
So we're going to move on to some guidelines for transcripts. And this is Megan. We're going to use another Rooted in Rights video, transcripts in a snap.
Transcripts in a snap. Think of a transcript as a text version of your video. When made correctly, video transcripts can be read by screen readers or turned into Braille documents, making your content accessible to people who are blind or low vision. If a video player doesn't support captions, a transcript can provide access for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. They're also helpful for people who want to quickly scan or search a video's content. So what's in a transcript? A basic transcript is just a written version of everything said in your video. It also indicates who says it and any relevant sounds. To make your transcripts more accessible, make sure to include any key visual information someone would need in order to understand what's going on, such as locations or important nonverbal communication. How else would someone relying on a transcript know that your characters were waving from a train? Many service providers will transcribe your video for you for less than $1 a minute. But if you've already done the work to caption your video on YouTube, producing a video transcript is a breeze. First, navigate to the video on YouTube and click the three-dot icon just below the player in the bottom right. Select Open Transcript from the drop-down menu, and a list of the video's captions will appear. Remove the timestamps by clicking on the three-dot icon in the transcript toolbar and selecting Toggle Timestamps. Highlight all the text and copy and paste it into a document. Add in your important visual information where needed. You can group lines together by speaker if you like, but it won't make a difference for people needing to access your content using screen readers. It's important to remember that not all documents with text are accessible. Most PDFs, for instance, flatten text into the document, making it invisible to assistive screen readers. So it's best to save your transcript as plain text in a file type like .doc, .txt, or HTML. After you've saved your transcript, include a link to it in your share text or on your website. If you share your video on social media, paste the transcript text as the first comment on your post so that users don't have to click to another page to access it. Our goal here is accessibility, and accessibility is cool.
Hello, this is Philip Woodward. Can you hear me? I'm going to talk about guidelines for ASL. Could you go to the next slide? How do you find an American Sign Language interpreter? In the state of North Carolina, every sign language interpreter who interprets for pay must be licensed unless it's in a educational or religious setting. Now, a state agency in the Department of Health and Human Services called the North Carolina Division of Services for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing has a directory of ASL interpreters. So you can go to their website and access the directory, and it has all of the licensed interpreters in the state of North Carolina broken down into 7 regions based on the 7 regional centers that the North Carolina Division of Services for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing has. So if you're looking for an interpreter in the Raleigh or the Triangle area, you can go to the Raleigh list. If you're looking for an interpreter in the Mountain area, you can go to the Asheville list. I want to point out that it is important for people who are deaf and hard of hearing to self-identify and request accommodations. It is also important for the online meeting host to be flexible and accommodating and also not assume things. For example, not every person who is deaf or hard of hearing knows sign language. And those people who don't know sign language might benefit more from captioning. Likewise, as I pointed out earlier, someone who was born deaf, whose primary language is American Sign Language, might get more benefit from an ASL interpreter than from captions. So anyway, when I want to request an interpreter for a meeting, I'll tell the meeting host or I'll tell my employer I'd like an interpreter, and the meeting host can find the interpreters here in the directory, and I can also make recommendations for interpreters that I like that I've worked with before. Next slide, please. This slide shows an example of the interpreting services agencies in North Carolina, and what you will see when you go to the Division of Services for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing website. You'll see the individual freelance interpreter's name or the agency's name, as well as the contact phone number and email addresses. And it will also tell you where the interpreter lives or what region of North Carolina they serve. A couple other things I want to point out when scheduling interpreters, next slide please, is that there are many considerations. And the Division of Services for the Deaf and the Hard of Hearing has tips that you can consider when booking or reserving an American Sign Language interpreter. For example, it is important to consider the length of the meeting. If it is a 1-hour meeting, typically hiring one interpreter will work. And the standard when you hire an interpreter is to hire the interpreter for a 2-hour minimum, plus you pay the interpreter mileage for wherever the interpreter is driving to or from. If the meeting is longer than 1 hour, it might be necessary to hire 2 interpreters because they will need to take breaks every 15 to 20 minutes and relieve each other. And they can also help each other out, like the interpreter on the break might help the working interpreter with things that interpreter might have missed. It will be important to consider the audience. You know, how many people are in attendance, how many of those people are deaf or hard of hearing people who are requesting the interpreter, and things like that. And it's very helpful to be able to provide materials to the interpreters in advance wherever possible. That could be the meeting agenda, that could be the PowerPoint, that could be all the handouts. So ArtsAccess actually did a test run of this webinar before the actual webinar where we had the interpreters on the test run. So the interpreters had access to the PowerPoint and they knew what we were going to talk about and who was going to cover what parts. So they would know whether they would have to sign or whether they would have to voice for a deaf person who might be signing. And that also leads to another consideration. There are some people like me who voice for themselves, so I only need an interpreter to sign to me, which is called expressive interpreting. There are people who are fully deaf who might not voice for themselves at all, so they might sign and then the interpreter will do receptive interpreting, where the interpreter will voice what the deaf person says to the other meeting participants. And then those meeting participants will voice back and the interpreter will sign it to the deaf person. And another thing which I pointed out earlier is flexibility is very important. And by flexibility, that means things like the meeting setup. If you're having an in-person event, you want to consider the lighting in the room, You want to put the interpreter up on the stage or close to the stage where the deaf and hard of hearing people can see the interpreter. You might need to reserve seats near the front of the room for the deaf and hard of hearing people to see the interpreter clearly. For online meetings, there will be considerations such as making sure the interpreter has all the connection information to be able to connect successfully. That might mean, making sure the interpreter has the webinar link, making sure the interpreter has all the call-in information. These are all pre-event considerations. Making sure that the interpreter has access to the audio so the interpreter can have all the dialogue or be able to hear all the dialogue to interpret correctly. Other consideration for online meetings, you can always email material to interpreters ahead of time. As I said before, if I go to an actual in-person meeting and I'm giving a PowerPoint presentation, I like to give the interpreters a copy of the PowerPoint that they can hold in front of them to follow along with me easily. If it's online, then you want to email it to the interpreter or the interpreting agency. You want to, wherever possible, pin the video on your online meeting platform if you have that ability. If you pin the video, then everybody who is participating in the meeting can see the captions. And as I pointed out earlier in my introduction, it's not just deaf and hard of hearing people who benefit from captioning or who might benefit from interpreters, but everyone might. Let me see. And then you want to consider rates. Interpreters use, individual interpreters have a rate when they freelance. Interpreting agencies charge a higher rate, but those interpreting agencies do more of the work up front. For example, if the interpreter gets sick, the interpreting agency can replace that interpreter. Whereas if you hire an individual freelance interpreter, that interpreter is sick one day, then you might have to spend more time contacting other interpreters to find somebody who's available that day if something happens. Thank you very much. This is Philip again. Let me go one more thing. When you're including your interpreter in the event, it's important to instruct the participants to speak one at a time. And as we have been doing on this webinar, it's important for the participant to introduce themselves before speaking. For example, say this is Philip, and then I make my comment. That's helpful so the interpreter knows who is talking, and all the deaf and hard of hearing people who might not be able to distinguish voices know who's talking. And then once you have the captioning and you have the transcript to read, it will be very helpful if you know who said what, rather than trying to figure it out later. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. This is Betsy. I'm going to cover some marketing and outreach. So once you're doing accessible online presentations, you want to reach the people that might need the service or use the service. And these are folks that may not have come to your events or aren't actively using your content because you haven't been providing these accommodations, or they just didn't know about it. Slide. One thing is, you probably already have patrons or people in your networks that could use this. As we said, 20% of people in our communities live with hearing loss. There's a lot of deaf people in North Carolina. So you probably already have connections. And once you start thinking about this or marketing, you're going to be able to engage them. Ways to do that include an accessibility statement on your website or your flyer or whatever you use to explain and educate people about your organization. We like to call it a welcome statement. We welcome people with disabilities. If you have an accessibility need, contact us. Have that live on somewhere where people come to learn about you. As we talked about in the beginning, with the planning, have a link to that in your marketing materials and a contact on how people can get information, make a request, or ask questions. Include their email and phone number. It's nice if you have a name, but at least have an email and a phone number, and make the person on the other end of that educated and knowledgeable. We hear this a lot, that people will call about accessibility or ADA accommodations, and the person that they are told to contact doesn't know what they're talking about or doesn't understand. So that comes into the training of your staff, thinking meaningfully about this and having a dedicated person. And you can always say, I am not sure of the answer. Let me get your contact and I will get back with you. That's all about the welcoming. And not having people bounce around and not being able to get answers. So that's something you can do that's free or low cost, and it doesn't promise you're going to do everything, but it engages people to ask questions and make you appear welcoming, which you should be. Then there's targeted marketing. Okay, wow, we really want to engage new audiences. We really want to reach people we haven't been reaching. That's a targeted marketing. And that is, slide. Sorry, this is the symbols that are now up. But targeted marketing just means you're going to talk to advocacy groups, talk to individuals, and ask them to help you share the information. A little bit more about marketing. What's on the slide is the symbols. These are access symbols that indicate you are providing the service. There's a voice controlled telephone. There's a what's used to be called a TTY, captions, sign language, and closed captions. People that need these services, they know what these are. So you don't have to explain them, because if you use them, you know what they are. They're nice shorthand. So if you have a graphic on a poster or a Facebook event, this means you're providing those accommodations. The one on the upper right, that's the hearing loop. That's in a lot of auditoriums and venues. And once again, these are easy to learn more about if you're interested. Slide. Don't get encouraged if no one shows up or signs up the first time you do this. People may not be used to you doing this, and so they don't know to be looking at your content. But it's like any audience. You might have to develop it and think about it and try more than once. Once again, the connections in the community. We love it when we see people from arts and cultural organizations going to disability events and resource fairs and saying, hi, I'm the new ADA coordinator, and I'd love to, learn about your community and know that we're trying to welcome you. So just those connections. Social media, that is your friend. Many groups have their own pages, have their own feeds. You can connect your offering or event to theirs. You can ask to join groups where you want to learn more. So social media, we have a lot of success on reaching people through our Facebook page. So think about that. And then reach out to us. Arts Access, one of our core services is to share accessible events. You can send it to us. We have an online form, and we will put it in our newsletter and in our other outlets if it's accessible. That's the key. Slide. So we are winding down. I do want to encourage everybody to stay in touch with us. We do a newsletter, and you can learn about our upcoming workshops and other things. Bola will do a webinar for your group. She has a whole webinar that she will bring to you and she is a contact for questions about NC Relay. Philip is doing a lot of great work with his organizations. He is very active on social media. So these are ways you can reach us after this is over. Slide. And ongoing resources. Megan has found a lot of these. And if you want more information or you need to go deeper in something we've talked about today, here are places you can get that. Slide.
That's it. That's the end.
Okay, sorry. So I was going to ask Megan, who's administrating the webinar, and I do want to give a shout out to Megan and to Mark. They have done a lot of work on this, and I'm just very grateful for the staff. I'm going to ask Megan to show our faces again.
Philip has something to add.
Oh, I'm sorry, Philip?
Yes, this is Philip here. Thank you, Betsy. So you want to make your content accessible and more widely available, right? You want people to see your YouTube videos and your social media posts and share them, right? Making your videos and posts accessible to deaf and hard of hearing people will widen your audience. And this is especially important during emergency preparedness messages, or with emergency preparedness messages during severe thunderstorms, tornado warnings, hurricanes, and ice storms. So when it comes to online accessibility, whether it's meetings or videos or other types of online content, it's worth the extra time and effort to make all of your communications as accessible as possible. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.